Captain Jake Reynolds had always been one for adventure. He'd signed up for space duty, eager to see the stars and experience a universe full of unknowns. But as he strode through the busy corridors of the Galaxia station, with its hustle and bustle of alien traders and human crew members, he couldn't have predicted this. His boots clicked against the cold metal floor, the hum of conversations all around him. He just finished a debriefing with his superior and was heading to the mess hall for some much-needed food when he saw her. She was standing in the doorway of a weapons cache, her posture confident and strong, as though the room itself was made for her presence. Her silver hair shimmered under the station's bright lights, cascading like a waterfall of moonlight down her back. Her skin was a deep, otherworldly shade of sapphire blue, glowing slightly under the artificial light. But it wasn't just her appearance that caught Jake off guard. It was the way she moved. There was something graceful and powerful about her, like a predator who knew exactly how to use her strength. Jake slowed, instinctively drawn to her, his eyes scanning her as she adjusted some piece of alien tech on her armor. Her suit was sleek, dark, and almost metallic, with glowing symbols that danced across it like runes. She looked like she had just stepped off a battlefield, and maybe she had. She turned her head, sensing his gaze, and their eyes locked. For a moment, the noise of the station seemed to fade away, and Jake's heart skipped a beat. She was stunning. "You're starring," she said, her voice smooth and amused. There was an edge of playfulness in her tone, something that immediately put him on edge. But it was a good kind of edge. Jake grinned, unable to resist. "I don't apologize for admiring beauty." The woman's eyes flashed with interest. She crossed her arms over her chest and her armor made a faint, soft clink. "Is that so? Well, if you like what you see so much, maybe you should get a better look." Jake blinked. "What?" She raised an eyebrow, a teasing smile spreading across her face. "I mean, you keep staring at my armor. If you think it looks so perfect, maybe you'd like to see what's underneath." Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. There was something in her eyes, something that dared him to respond, and for a moment he didn't know what to say. His mind raced. Was she serious? Before he could get another word out, she began unlatching her armor with a casual ease that only added to the shock of the situation. The plates of her armor clicked open, falling away in smooth, almost musical movements, revealing her strong, lithe body beneath. The scars on her skin, marks from battles fought and survived, only made her look more fierce. Jake's jaw nearly dropped. He hadn't expected her to actually do it. His eyes quickly scanned her form. She was even more stunning without the armor, her strength evident in the way she carried herself. And yet, there was something vulnerable in the way she stood there, almost like she was daring him to see her for who she truly was. "I wasn't expecting that," Jake said, his voice rougher than usual. He cleared his throat, trying to regain some composure. The alien woman simply smiled, unbothered by his reaction. "I figured you'd like it, but hey, if you're not impressed, I can put it back on." Jake laughed nervously, his heart racing. No, I'm impressed, definitely impressed." She stepped toward him with a confident swagger, the way she moved making it clear that she was in control of the situation. "Good. Maybe next time I'll take it all off, just for you." Jake's eyes widened, his mouth going dry. "Next time," he repeated, barely able to process her words. She winked at him and walked past him, leaving him standing there, frozen, in a mix of surprise and something deeper he couldn't quite place. Was she flirting with him? Or was it all part of some alien joke? Shaking his head to clear his thoughts, Jake continued on toward the mess hall, but his mind kept drifting back to her. Lyra. That's what she had called herself. Her name rolled in his mind like a melody. There was something about her, something that made him feel like his usual cool, collected self wasn't going to cut it. He didn't know why, but he wanted to know her. And maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to see that armor off again. Jake reached the mess hall, but all he could think about was the alien woman who had just blown through his composure like a breeze. She wasn't like anyone he'd ever met, beautiful, fierce, and completely unafraid to challenge him. But Jake wasn't the type to back down, especially not when something this interesting had just landed in his lap. He found his seat at a table, trying to focus on the food in front of him, but all he could do was smile to himself. The universe was a strange, unpredictable place, and this was only the beginning. The days that followed Jake's encounter with Lyra were a blur. He couldn't shake the image of her, the way she'd confidently stripped off her armor like it was nothing, revealing a woman who was strong, beautiful, and unafraid. The thought of her lingered in his mind, even when he tried to focus on the mission at hand. The mission was simple enough. The Rakoth, an aggressive alien race, had launched a series of attacks on several colonies in the galaxy. Jake's team was assigned to intercept them before they could reach any more vulnerable stations, but things never went as smoothly as expected. Jake, as always, was at the helm of the operation, directing his crew, which included a mix of humans and aliens. They were meeting up with Lyra's squad, her people, the Galaxians, known for their ruthless combat skills and their warlike nature. And as much as Jake respected them, he knew that this wasn't going to be an easy alliance. There was tension in the air, a sense that not everyone was convinced humans belonged in the fight. Lyra, of course, had no such doubts. The moment she walked into the briefing room, her blue eyes locked onto Jake's. Her gaze was sharp, unreadable, but Jake could feel the warmth behind it. "Captain Reynolds," she said with a small, knowing smile, "I trust you're ready for this." Jake nodded, trying not to sound too confident. "Always." One of the Galaxian commanders, a tall, imposing figure with jet-black skin and glowing red tattoos, stepped forward. His name was Archer, and he didn't seem to share Lyra's faith in the humans. "We've fought the Rakoth before," Archer said, his voice low and growling, "and I'm not sure we can trust your kind to do the job properly." Jake didn't flinch. "I've fought my share of battles, you'll see soon enough." Lyra stepped between them, her gaze unwavering. "Archer, if you want to make it through this alive, you'll respect him. Captain Reynolds has earned his place in this mission, just like you have." Archer grumbled something under his breath but didn't argue further. Jake shot Lyra a quick, grateful smile, but she just gave him a wink. That one simple gesture was enough to set his heart racing again. She had a way of making him feel like he was the only one in the room, even when there were dozens of people around. The mission went into full swing as they boarded their respective ships. The Rakoth were not far ahead, and the tension was palpable. Jake's crew and Lyra's warriors worked together, preparing their weapons and running final checks. Jake found himself alongside Lyra again, this time in the cockpit of his ship. The hum of the engine filled the space between them, the stars outside swirling by like streaks of light. "You're quiet," Lyra remarked, her eyes glancing over at him. Jake smirked, trying to play it cool. "Just thinking about how awesome I'm going to look when I save the day." Lyra chuckled, her laughter like music in the air. "You're something else, human. I'll admit I wasn't sure about you at first, but now I think you'll make a fine ally." Jake's heart skipped a beat, and here I was thinking you'd already figured me out. Lyra shot him a teasing glance. "Not yet. I'm still waiting to see how you handle yourself in battle." Challenge accepted. Before he could say anything else, the alarm blared. The Rakoth fleet had entered the system, and the battle was about to begin. The next few hours were a whirlwind of chaos and combat. The Rakoth ships were massive, heavily armored and ruthless. The fight was intense, with laser fire filling the sky and explosions lighting up the space around them. Jake could feel the adrenaline surging through him as he piloted his ship through the chaos, dodging enemy fire and returning shots with precision. Lyra's ship was right beside him, her movements graceful and deadly. She was a force to be reckoned with, her ship weaving through the enemy like it was dancing, each strike landing perfectly. It was clear that she wasn't just skilled, she was born for this kind of fight. but even the most experienced warriors could get caught off guard. A Rakoth fighter appeared out of nowhere, firing a barrage of lasers directly at Lyra's ship. Jake's heart lurched as he watched her ship take a direct hit. "No," he shouted into the comm. "Lyra, respond." There was a brief moment of static before her voice crackled back through. "I'm fine, Reynolds. Just a little scorched, that's all." Jake clenched his fists, trying to stay calm. "Get out of there, we need to fall back." But Lyra didn't hesitate. "Negative, I'm not leaving until the job is done." Jake's pulse raced. He couldn't just sit back and watch her fight alone. Without thinking, he charged toward the enemy fighter that had hit her, locking on and firing everything he had. With one well-placed shot, the Rakoth fighter exploded in a burst of light. "There, now we can fall back," Jake said, trying to sound confident, though his heart was still pounding in his chest. Lyra's voice came through, teasing as ever. "I knew you were good, Reynolds, but I didn't think you'd come to my rescue." Jake couldn't help but grin. "What can I say? I don't leave a teammate behind." The battle raged on, but for a brief moment, amidst the chaos, Jake and Lyra shared a connection, a silent understanding that they could count on each other, no matter what. The Rakoth fleet was finally retreating, but the fight wasn't over yet. As the remaining enemies scattered, Jake found himself breathing a little easier. His heart, however, hadn't slowed down. Lyra's ship pulled alongside his as they cruised back toward their station. "You did good, human," Lyra said, her voice softer now, tinged with something warmer. Jake smirked, unable to hide his satisfaction. "Told you I was awesome." Lyra's eyes met his, and for a second everything felt still. "You're more than awesome, Captain." And for the first time in his life, Jake wasn't sure where the mission ended and his feelings for Lyra began. He was starting to realize that he might not just be fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for something far more dangerous: his heart. The days after the battle with the Rakoth passed in a blur of repairs and debriefings, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling of Lyra's presence. She was always there, somewhere in the station, an unspoken challenge in the air between them. They worked together when they had to, shared brief conversations when they could, but something hung between them that neither had spoken aloud. Jake found himself thinking about her more than he cared to admit. Her strength, her confidence, the way she never hesitated in battle, and the way she seemed to see right through him, as though she knew there was more to him than just the tough exterior. It was like she could read his thoughts. One evening, Jake was making his way to the mess hall, still replaying the mission in his mind when he saw her again. She was leaning against the wall near the entrance, her back straight and her arms crossed over her chest. Even in casual moments, Lyra radiated strength and beauty. The silver hair that had been pulled back into a tight braid earlier that day now fell loose, a cascade of moonlight running down her back. Her glowing blue skin, a shade brighter in the dim light of the corridor, looked even more captivating. Jake's heart gave a little flutter, and for a second he considered walking the other way. But then he remembered, he was a captain, not a coward. "Lyra," he said, his voice more casual than he felt, "I didn't expect to find you here." Lyra's eyes met his, a playful glint in them. "You seem surprised. I think you should expect to see me more often, Captain. After all, I did save your life back there." Jake smiled, stepping closer. "I don't think I've forgotten that, but you did seem pretty intent on saving your own skin, too." "True," she said, stepping away from the wall and meeting his gaze with an intensity that made Jake's pulse quicken. "But someone had to keep you alive so you could keep doing all that heroic stuff." Jake chuckled, shaking his head. "You're not exactly the type to let anyone save you, though." Lyra tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Maybe, but I'm not too proud to let someone else pull my weight when I need them." The words were simple, but they carried weight. For the first time, Jake felt like there was something beneath her usual teasing, something real, something unspoken. He was about to say something in response when a voice called out behind them. Captain Reynolds, Lyra. Jake turned to see Archer, the Galaxian commander, striding toward them, his expression stern. "We've got work to do. We're meeting in the briefing room in 5." Lyra glanced at Jake, a flicker of something like disappointment crossing her face before she masked it with her usual smirk. "Duty calls, Captain. You'll have to survive without me for a little longer." Jake held her gaze a moment longer before responding, his voice low. "I'll survive, but I'm still not sure how you'll handle it when I save your life again." She gave him a wink, then turned to follow Archer. "Let's hope you don't need to." Jake watched her go, his heart still pounding in his chest. He knew he was starting to feel something deeper for her, but he wasn't sure what it was yet. And if he was being honest, that terrified him. Later that evening, the meeting had ended, and Jake found himself alone in his quarters, sorting through mission reports. But he couldn't focus. His thoughts kept drifting back to Lyra. Her smile, her laugh, the way she made him feel like he could take on the universe. After what felt like hours, there was a soft knock on his door. He stood up, surprised. No one ever knocked, especially not at this hour. "Come in," he called out, his voice betraying a mix of curiosity and excitement. The door slid open, and there she was, Lyra, standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "You look like you could use some company," she said, stepping inside. "And since we seem to keep missing each other these days, I figured I'd make the effort." Jake's heart skipped a beat. "You don't have to." But she cut him off with a soft smile. "I know, but I wanted to. Besides, we both need a break from all this tension, don't you think?" Jake nodded, taking a step closer to her. "You don't have to ask twice. You always seem to know when I need saving." Lyra smiled, though there was something deeper in her eyes now. "Maybe I'm the one who needs saving this time." She was close now, so close he could feel the heat of her body radiating toward him. The quiet in the room seemed to grow louder with each passing second. Jake's mind was racing, but his body was betraying him. Every part of him wanted to reach out, to close the space between them, to see where this could go. But Lyra spoke first. "Jake, I—" Before she could finish, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall, interrupting the moment. Jake stiffened, and Lyra's expression shifted back into something more guarded. She stepped back, as if remembering where they were. "Maybe another time," she said, her tone playful but her eyes not quite hiding the vulnerability there. "Duty calls, right?" Jake couldn't help but smile, though his heart still raced. "Yeah, maybe." As she turned to leave, he called out, "Lyra, next time no interruptions." She glanced back over her shoulder, her smile a mix of teasing and something more serious. "I'm counting on it, Captain." Jake watched her disappear down the corridor, the door sliding shut behind her. His heart thudded in his chest as he leaned against the desk, fighting to steady his breathing. He was starting to realize that the mission was becoming secondary to something else, something he couldn't ignore anymore. And that something had blue skin, silver hair, and a smile that had him utterly captivated. The following days aboard the Galaxia station were filled with a whirlwind of activity. The battle against the Rakoth had been won, but it was clear that the war was far from over. New threats appeared on the horizon, and Jake and Lyra's teams were once again being called into action. The tension between them, however, had only grown stronger, the unspoken connection more palpable with every passing hour. Jake had done his best to focus on the mission, but every time he passed Lyra, every time their eyes met across the room or in the middle of a strategy session, it became harder to ignore the pull he felt toward her. She was always there, always confident, always ready for whatever came next. But Jake had started to see a side of her that few others got to witness, the vulnerability that she tried so hard to hide behind that tough, warrior exterior. Lyra wasn't just a soldier. She was a person with her own fears, her own struggles, and Jake found himself drawn to those things. He wanted to understand her, to be someone she could lean on, just as much as he admired her strength. It was during one of the strategy meetings as they were preparing to intercept another Rakoth fleet that the moment came. The station's command center buzzed with activity, reports streaming in from all corners of the galaxy. Jake stood at the head of the table, his mind calculating the next move, when Lyra walked in. Her presence was electric, and for a split second the room seemed to quiet as all eyes turned toward her. She flashed a small, confident smile at Jake, as though acknowledging their silent connection. But then she shifted into her usual commanding mode, taking her place at the table. "We have a problem," she said, her voice firm and steady. "The Rakoth fleet is more advanced than we thought. They've developed a new weapon, one that could tear through our defenses." Jake frowned, his hand running through his hair as he absorbed the information. "What's our best course of action?" Lyra's gaze locked onto his, her eyes serious. "We'll need to split our forces. Half will distract the fleet and the rest of us will go in and disable their weapon. It's risky. We'll be outnumbered." Jake met her eyes without hesitation. "Then we'll make sure the Rakoth know what it means to underestimate us." There was a flicker of something in Lyra's eyes, something that felt like pride mixed with something softer, but she quickly masked it with her usual warrior's resolve. "I'll lead the team on the ground. You'll handle the fleet, Captain." He nodded, agreed. "But you better come back in one piece, Lyra. I'm not doing this without you." She gave him a quick, wry smile. "Don't worry, Captain. I plan on keeping you on your toes." The battle was set in motion, and everything felt like it was happening at once. The fleet of Rakoth ships loomed ahead, their massive forms dwarfing Jake's crew. It was a dangerous, high-stakes operation, and as Jake sat in the cockpit of his ship, his fingers gripped the controls tightly, every inch of him on alert. Lyra's voice came through the comms, calm and steady, despite the chaos around them. "We've got this, Reynolds. Just stick to the plan." Jake couldn't help but smile. "That's the plan, stick to you." "Always," Lyra replied, a spark of humor in her voice. The first shots were fired, and the battle erupted in a burst of blinding light. Jake's ship zipped through the stars, dodging enemy fire as he worked with his team to break through the Rakoth's defensive line. His heart raced, his pulse syncing with the thrum of the ship's engines. Lyra was in the thick of it too, her ship darting between the Rakoth's ships with the precision of a seasoned warrior. Jake couldn't help but admire her from afar, watching as she weaved through enemy fire like it was second nature. But even with all her skill, he knew she wasn't invincible. The situation quickly turned dire. A Rakoth fighter locked onto Lyra's ship, its cannons charging up for a deadly strike. Jake's heart stopped. Without thinking, he dove his ship toward hers, firing on the enemy with all his might. The explosion rocked his ship, but it sent the Rakoth fighter into a fiery spiral. "Lyra, get out of there!" Jake shouted, his voice urgent. Lyra's voice crackled back through the comms, steady despite the danger. "I've got it handled, Reynolds. Just finish your part." Jake didn't argue. He focused on his mission, coordinating with his crew to disable the Rakoth's weapon. His hands moved with practiced ease, directing his ship in tight, evasive maneuvers, all the while keeping an eye on Lyra's progress. His worry for her, however, never wavered. Hours passed and the battle finally reached its climax. The Rakoth weapon was destroyed, their fleet scattered. Victory was theirs. Jake's ship landed back on the station, the cheers of his crew filling the air. But he didn't care about the celebrations. All that mattered was getting to Lyra. He found her outside the command center, her armor scratched and scorched from the battle, but her posture was as proud and confident as ever. She turned to him as he approached, her lips curling into that familiar teasing smile. "Did you miss me?" she asked, her voice soft, almost teasing but with an undeniable warmth. Jake didn't hesitate. He walked up to her, his heart pounding. "Always," he said quietly. Without another word, he pulled her into his arms. For a moment, the weight of the universe seemed to disappear, leaving only the two of them in the quiet of the station. Lyra's arms wrapped around him, her body pressing against his, and he could feel the steady beat of her heart. "I wasn't sure I'd make it back to you," Lyra whispered, her voice low. Jake smiled against her hair. "I never doubted it for a second." They stood there for a long while, just holding each other, the sounds of the station around them distant and insignificant. It wasn't just the battle that had brought them closer. It was everything they had gone through together. And in that moment, with her in his arms, Jake knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning of something far bigger than either of them could have imagined. The days after the battle with the Rakoth were quieter, but that didn't mean Jake could escape the emotions swirling inside him. The victory felt hollow compared to the weight in his chest every time he thought of Lyra. She was always there, always in the back of his mind, even when they weren't together. It was strange. In the midst of all the chaos, the missions, the danger, the endless responsibilities, Jake had found something he hadn't expected: peace. And it was only when he was near her. Lyra, for her part, seemed as unreadable as ever. She was still the fierce, confident warrior who never hesitated in the face of danger. But Jake had seen glimpses of something softer, something human, underneath her tough exterior. The way her eyes softened when she looked at him, the way she almost seemed to let her guard down when they spoke. She trusted him, and that trust meant more than he could say. But the tension between them was still there, like a quiet hum in the background, always just beneath the surface. Both of them knew there was something more. Neither of them had spoken of it. Jake was getting tired of the silence. He couldn't keep pretending that everything was just about the missions, about the next enemy to fight, the next planet to save. Lyra had become more than just a teammate. She had become someone who meant something to him. The moment came one evening as the sun began to set over the station. The stars were beginning to twinkle outside, and the usual bustle of the hallways had quieted to a low hum. Jake found himself standing near the observation window, his gaze lost in the vastness of space. He'd been thinking about her again, about the way she laughed after a close call in the last fight, about the way her eyes sparkled when she spoke of her home planet, the Galaxian warriors, and the battles they fought. "Hey," a voice said from behind him, interrupting his thoughts. "You look like you're a million light years away." Jake turned around and smiled when he saw her standing there. Lyra. She looked as stunning as ever, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, her blue skin glowing softly in the dim light. She was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching him with that familiar, playful gaze. Jake chuckled, trying to hide the sudden rush of warmth flooding through him. "Maybe I am, or maybe I'm just thinking about the next mission." Lyra stepped forward, her eyes narrowing slightly as she took in his expression. "You don't have to pretend with me, you know." Jake's heart skipped a beat. He could feel his defenses slipping. This was it. This was the moment he'd been avoiding. He could keep pretending, keep playing the soldier who never lets his guard down, or he could finally be honest. "You're right," Jake said quietly, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "It's not just about the mission anymore, Lyra. It's about you." Her eyes widened, and for a moment she looked almost unsure. The confident warrior who had led them through so many battles now seemed like she was standing on the edge of something she wasn't sure she wanted to jump into. "You're important to me," Jake continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "More than anyone else on this station. I can't keep pretending it's just the mission. I'm not that good at pretending, Lyra." Lyra didn't respond immediately. She took a step closer to him, her eyes searching his face, as if trying to read something he hadn't said yet. Her expression was soft, but there was still that familiar fire in her gaze. "You think I don't feel it too?" she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. Jake's breath caught in his throat. "What do you mean?" Lyra took another step forward, closing the distance between them. "I've been trying to ignore it. The way I feel when I'm near you, when we're together in the middle of all this chaos. I've tried to focus on the mission just like you, but I can't." Jake's heart raced. He reached out, his hand brushing against hers. It felt like the whole universe was holding its breath. "So you're telling me," Jake started, his voice shaky, "that this isn't just some distraction for you?" Lyra smiled then, a smile that made his heart beat faster. "I'm not some soldier who can just turn off emotions when things get tough, and neither are you, Jake." She stepped even closer until they were inches apart. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt heavy with everything they hadn't said before, but this time the words came without hesitation. "I'm not good at this," Jake confessed, his voice rough. "I've spent my whole life hiding behind missions, behind the orders, but when I look at you I can't hide anymore. I don't want to." Lyra's eyes softened, and she reached up to gently touch his cheek, her fingers warm against his skin. "You don't have to hide with me, Jake. Not anymore." The distance between them closed, and this time neither of them hesitated. Jake leaned down, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was soft at first, then deepened, as if they were both trying to make up for lost time. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathing harder, but there was a smile on Lyra's lips. "Guess we're in this together, huh?" Jake grinned, his heart still pounding. "I wouldn't have it any other way." And for the first time in a long while, everything felt right. It wasn't just about the mission. It was about them, about the connection they had found in the middle of a war, about the love that had started to bloom in the most unexpected place. Jake took her hand in his, feeling stronger than ever. "Together," he agreed. And this time, there was no more pretending. They were ready to face whatever came next together. The days after Jake and Lyra had admitted their feelings to each other were nothing short of exhilarating. They had found something in each other that neither had expected, a connection forged in the heat of battle but growing stronger in the quiet moments between missions. Every glance, every smile, every shared conversation felt like it was building toward something neither of them could quite explain. But they didn't need to. They were in it together, and that was enough. The station was buzzing with preparations for the next mission, a dangerous operation to stop the Rakath from gaining a foothold on a strategically important planet. The intel had come in fast, and the urgency was high. It was an all-hands-on-deck situation, and Jake knew this was going to be their toughest mission yet. As he walked down the long, metallic corridors of the station, his mind was focused on the task at hand. But that didn't stop his thoughts from wandering to Lyra. She had become such a constant presence in his life, in a way that felt like it was always meant to be. No matter the chaos around them, no matter the danger, Lyra was there, by his side, ready to face whatever came next. He found her in the war room, already in full gear, her silver hair pulled back tight and her sharp blue eyes scanning over the mission brief. The sight of her, standing there like she owned the room, made something inside him stir. She was a force of nature, and yet, for all her strength, she had shown him a side of herself that made her even more captivating. "You're late, Captain," Lyra teased without looking up, her voice warm with the kind of familiarity that had grown between them in such a short time. Jake grinned, walking over to her side. "I've been thinking about my favorite soldier. Can you blame me for being distracted?" She shot him a playful side glance, a smirk tugging at her lips. "Maybe, but don't make me do all the work while you daydream." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low whisper. "I can handle the work, but only if I know I'll get to see you again after it's all over." Her eyes softened, and for a moment the world outside the war room seemed to fade away. "You will," she promised, her voice steady but with something deeper behind it. "I'm not going anywhere, Jake, not without you." Her words, spoken so simply, made his heart swell. It was more than just a promise. It was a bond between them, one that felt unbreakable, no matter what challenges they would face. The mission brief was intense. The Rakath were prepared to launch a full assault on a planet vital to the stability of the galaxy, and Jake's team was the only one in position to stop them. It was going to be a risky maneuver, but they had no choice. Jake and Lyra stood side by side, going over the plan. Their teams would split into two groups, one to sabotage the Rakoth's fleet, the other to infiltrate their ground forces and disable their weapons systems. The stakes were high and the pressure was on. "We're going to need to move quickly," Jake said, his tone serious as he met Lyra's eyes. "The Rakoth won't hesitate to destroy everything in their path." Lyra nodded, her face a mask of determination. "We won't give them that chance." Jake reached out, his hand brushing against hers. It was a small gesture, but one that spoke volumes. In the heat of battle, when everything felt like it was falling apart, he knew that holding onto her, holding onto this connection they had, was what would keep him grounded. "I'm glad you're with me," Jake said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Lyra gave him a soft smile, her fingers curling around his. "I'm not going anywhere, Captain. Not now, not ever." The battle started as soon as they hit the atmosphere of the planet. Explosions rocked the surface as the two groups launched into action, their ships dodging incoming fire from the Rakoth fleet. Jake was in the cockpit, his hands moving with practiced precision as he coordinated with his team, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Lyra. He could almost feel her presence, even though she was miles away, deep in the heart of the enemy's stronghold. The first few hours of the mission were a blur, constant action, constant danger, but Jake's focus never wavered. Every time he heard Lyra's voice over the comm, his heart steadied. She was there, leading her team with the same strength and confidence that had first drawn him to her. Then disaster struck. A Rakoth ship, larger and more heavily armed than anything Jake had seen before, broke through the defenses. The ground team was in danger. Lyra's team was pinned down and there was no time to waste. Jake's heart raced as he heard the distress call. "Lyra," he shouted over the comm, "we're coming to you." "No, Jake," she replied, her voice firm and unyielding. "Finish the mission. I'll handle this." But Jake wasn't having it. "We do this together or not at all." Without waiting for a response, Jake pulled his ship into a steep dive, heading straight for the enemy ship. He wasn't going to lose her, not now, not ever. The next few minutes were a blur of flashing lights and explosions. Jake and his team fought tooth and nail to break through the Rakoth defenses, but all he could think about was getting to Lyra. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they arrived at the coordinates where her team had made their stand. Lyra was there, standing tall amidst the chaos, her weapon raised and her eyes fierce. When she saw Jake, a flicker of something softer crossed her face. "You're stubborn," she said, a smile tugging at her lips. Jake grinned, pulling her into a quick, fierce embrace. "You love it." She laughed softly, wrapping her arms around him. "I do." As the battle wound down and the Rakoth forces were defeated, Jake found himself standing beside Lyra, his arm around her waist. The mission was a success, but the real victory had been something more. In the heat of battle, they had proven what they already knew. They could trust each other, and they would always have each other's backs. As the dust settled and the station was secure, Jake looked down at Lyra, his heart full. "Together, huh?" he said, his voice soft but sure. Lyra smiled up at him, her eyes sparkling with pride. "Always." And for the first time, Jake didn't have to worry about what came next. No matter what the universe threw at them, he knew they would face it together. The days after the mission were calm, but Jake knew it wouldn't last. The war against the Rakoth was far from over, and every victory they achieved only made the next battle seem that much more daunting. But for the first time in a long while, Jake felt like he wasn't facing it alone. Lyra was there by his side, and that made all the difference. They spent their time preparing for the next mission, training and reviewing intel. But in the quiet moments, when the chaos of the galaxy seemed far away, Jake and Lyra found themselves enjoying each other's company in ways neither of them had expected. Their connection had deepened, and though neither of them said it aloud, they both knew that whatever came next, they'd face it together. One evening, as they sat in the mess hall, the station's artificial lights flickering above, Lyra caught Jake's gaze, her eyes sparkling with mischief. She leaned across the table, her voice soft but teasing. "You know," she said, her lips curving into that familiar smile, "I've been thinking about what you said before the mission, about not letting me out of your sight." Jake chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "And what about it?" Lyra's gaze softened, her smile fading into something more serious. "I meant it, you know. I'm not going anywhere, not without you." Jake's heart swelled at her words. They didn't need to say more. The way she looked at him, the way she touched his hand sometimes without thinking, it was enough. But still, there was something hanging in the air, a sense that they hadn't fully expressed everything they felt. Before he could respond, the station's comm system crackled to life, breaking the moment. The voice that came through was sharp, urgent. "Captain Reynolds, we need you in the command center immediately. We've got a situation." Jake exchanged a glance with Lyra, his heart sinking. "Looks like duty calls," he said, standing up and giving her a quick, reassuring smile. "Stay close, all right." Lyra stood too, her expression unreadable. "Always." The command center was chaos when Jake arrived, the usual hum of activity replaced by a tense energy. His crew was gathered around the central table, their faces grim as they processed incoming data. At the center of it all stood Commander Klein, his expression tight with worry. "Captain," Klein said, his voice serious, "we've just intercepted a Rakoth transmission. It's not a standard attack. They've got something bigger planned." Jake's pulse quickened. "What are we looking at?" Klein pulled up a holographic map of the galaxy, zooming in on a distant star system. "They've been amassing resources in a remote sector. Intel suggests they've developed a weapon, something capable of wiping out entire fleets in one strike." Jake's stomach twisted. "When do we move?" "Immediately," Klein replied. "We'll need every ship in the fleet and we'll have to move fast. We don't have much time." Lyra stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she studied the map. "If they've built something this powerful, they'll be expecting us. We'll need a strategy." Jake turned to her, his eyes locking with hers. She had always been his equal in every battle, and this time would be no different. "Any ideas?" Lyra met his gaze, her voice steady. "We split up. We'll need a decoy to draw their attention, while the rest of us take out their weapon." Jake nodded. It was a risky plan, but it was their only option. "Let's do it." The fleet launched at once, the ships darting through space like shooting stars, all heading toward the Rakoth stronghold. Jake's heart pounded as his ship raced toward the enemy's base, the weight of the mission pressing down on him. But even with the risk ahead, his thoughts kept drifting to Lyra. They were about to face one of the toughest challenges yet, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something unexpected was coming. As they neared the Rakoth base, the first wave of fighters engaged the enemy. Jake's ship was right in the thick of it, dodging laser blasts and returning fire. But as the battle raged on, something felt off. The Rakoth weren't fighting like they usually did. It was too easy. "Lyra, something's wrong," Jake said into the comm, his voice tense. "I'm with you," she replied, her tone just as sharp. "We need to figure out what they're up to. Stay sharp." And then, without warning, the sky above them lit up in a blinding flash of light. Jake's ship rocked violently as a massive shockwave rippled through space. His heart stopped. The weapon was active. "Captain," Lyra's voice came through the comm, but it was muffled, as if she was struggling to make herself heard over the chaos. "The weapon, it's a trap." Before Jake could respond, the comm went dead. He cursed under his breath, panic rising in his chest. The Rakoth hadn't just built a weapon, they'd baited him, luring them right into the heart of their trap. His mind raced, trying to think through the chaos. The weapon was powerful, but if he could get close enough, there might still be a way to disable it. But he needed to get to Lyra first. She was in the heart of it. "Hang on, Lyra," he muttered, his fingers flying over the controls of his ship. "I'm coming for you." The fight intensified as Jake pushed forward, the darkness of space illuminated by explosions and fire. Every inch of him screamed for Lyra's safety. He knew she was in danger, but he also knew they had no time to waste. The fate of countless lives depended on this mission. He barreled through the final line of defenses and saw her. There she was, standing tall in the midst of the chaos, fighting as fiercely as ever. But the danger wasn't over yet. The Rakoth weapon was still charging up, and Jake could feel the clock ticking down. "Lyra," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the comms. "We finish this together." With a final, desperate push, Jake dove into the heart of the Rakoth stronghold. The weapon was within reach, and so was their future.